we did have a discussion on this last week. So, how do startup companies such as Julian's, established companies such as BioVac, how do you get money for investment in innovations, etc.? And that shouldn't be funded from the price that is being offered to the state. Because remember, for us as procurers, we're going to look more at cost efficiency, what is affordable. And even in the plenary this morning, there was a whole focus on, we need to be more efficient, we need to be more affordable in our offerings, etc. So I think the whole of government approach is what is needed. In South Africa, we do have the Interdepartmental Committee. So Rakeshni did allude to it, where we have Treasury, DTI, DSI, and Health. And obviously the strategy is one of the instruments that we are going to be used to implement whatever recommendations come out of that interdepartmental committee. So I think just as a procurer, we would rather want the support. So if there is innovation that needs to be done, DSI, you get the funding to help that company to do the innovation so that the product offering when it comes to us is affordable, and that cost isn't transferred to us because that cost has been borne somewhere else. So for me, that collaborative approach would be the thing that works.
It's really interesting. The idea that we don't have what it takes is just so wrong. If you look at what you're doing in CP in terms of increasing yields and API production processes, it means your input costs are cheaper. If you look at what people are doing in terms of efficiencies and optimization of production cycles in finishing goods, you can get there. You look at regulatory harmonization and what that can do for market scale. There's all these different ways in which we can actually get to the scale we need to get to at as good or even cheaper pricing than what we're paying from offshore. There's a really interesting example, which many of you may or may not know about, which is quality chemicals in Uganda. So quality chemicals Uganda used to be called CIPLA quality chemicals, and until November last year was a significantly, in fact, majoritively held business by CIPLA out of India. CIPLA sold their stake in November last year, and then in the March results that were published in May, because remember, CIPLA Quality Chemicals Uganda is a listed company, so this is public data. In the first quarter after they got out of their fixed price API agreements, they doubled their profitability. And all it was getting out of the fixed price API contracts that they had with their prior owner. So there's stuff that we're not even thinking of yet that I think we need to be bringing to bear. So, Moraina, you've had at least 30 minutes to prepare for this. Moraina is the CEO of BioVac, but his chairman, Skumbuza, was supposed to be here, but managed to get stuck in Johannesburg this morning. Moraina, talk to us about the different things. You're the manufacturer. You're the one who's looking to do deals. What are the different things that you think we can be looking at as ways in order to prefer African manufacturers, other than this game of I say prefer, you say price, I say prefer, you say price? It can't just be about that. What else is there?
Yeah, thanks, Iain. I'm not sure whether I'll provide the answers, but maybe just to paint the landscape and I'm sure the landscape that we'll be talking about, all of us are familiar, but I think it's important sometimes to just rehash some of the realities that are out there. So when you look, I always think about the arrows that are going in different directions. So when you look at a manufacturer, and whether it's what you are setting up in terms of your factory, or it's your skills that you obviously have to pay a minimum inflationary price. The more you get into deeper into your business, the regulatory costs go up, because you must remember quality and regulatory don't stand behind. You always have to keep up. I was just talking to our team now. They want extra pharmacovigilance personnel because they're thinking, okay, if we're going to go for PQ in the next 3 years, we should beef up on that. And I'm just making one example. The cost for financing, if you have loans as a company, like some of us do, all of that is, the arrow is actually going up each year. So there's pressure on you to fund and to keep up. And I'm not even talking about, going to the next scale, just keeping up. The arrow is going up that way. So you really have pressure as a manufacturer to keep up and to make sure that you're never actually questioned about your quality, because you want to make sure that those things are always there. Firstly, for your own pride, but also to make sure that if you talk to customers never question your product. But also you are also trying to get tech transfers, so you also don't want to be questioned. So you're all constantly investing, and the arrow is going up. On another hand, as we know, and many governments, I mean, we can even talk about the US, they're always talking about prices and how unaffordable healthcare is being, and governments, and I mean, whilst we have direct consumers, but in this context, maybe let's talk about governments, that governments have various pressure, and that arrow is facing the opposite direction in terms of what they can afford. Now, that's so either they are not getting the tax base enough, or the disease burden, as we know now, non-communicable diseases are coming up, new products are coming up that ought to be funded, but they can't be funded. So the per capita equivalent of products, is diminishing, because now you're having so many other interventions that the healthcare system need to be. So it's looking in opposite directions, and that's where the tension, I think, comes in. That gets played out in terms of, governments can only do so much, and whereas industry is obviously required to do more and more and more to keep up the standards and to keep staff. Quite frankly, as an example, electricity prices are going up. Just about everything in our world is going up. So there lies the tension, and I'm not even talking about issues about scale and all of that. So coming back to, and again, I don't have a solution, and we go around and trying to find out other governments or any areas that maybe procure vaccines differently that we can learn from. I'm not sure whether there's anything like that. We know that there are different ways of doing it. Where governments would either support their own state-owned, if you're state-owned, if you take the case of Brazil or Indonesia, they have state-owned companies that are there. They procure from the state-owned entities, but they also ensure that the tech transfers actually happen in the country. Now, how they define their return, I'm not sure in terms of how they define their return. So I think what is important is that we are having all of these systems that are out in terms of trying to have this balancing act of these arrows going up and down. And it feels as if we haven't stretched our imagination enough to really understand what is this middle ground that can really be optimized. Are we actually having those conversations to come to a commonality? So if I go to any government official now, even within Department of Health, and then I go within, I'm sure I'll get different answers in terms of what is the definition of return. Ultimately, if you think about human beings and even government wants a return. Okay, now we may define return differently. It may not be financial return, but there has to be some return of some sort. Now, do I understand Department of Health's return in its crisply? I'm probably not. Am I asking? Maybe I should be asking more, And so I think we need to get to an equilibrium of understanding what is this return that everybody wants. And is there this, if you have all of these circles that are bubbling up, is there a commonality where they actually meet to make sure that the regulatory standards are high enough, to make sure that there's long-term contracts, which is what we want, to make sure that prices are affordable, to make sure that there's quality vaccines, in vaccines terms, but also make sure that we have pandemic preparedness. We're just talking about pandemic preparedness. So it's actually a difficult space where we're talking about all of these things and trying to make it work, but I'm not sure that we are having the rich objective conversation. And who should be having that conversation? Is it governments, manufacturers, regulators, and global procurers? Not to say, no, Gavi, you must find the solution, Khadija, you must find the solution. But just to have that discussion to say, guys, it's something's already not working, but we are actually going to head to a disaster because we'll never be ready for a pandemic if some of these things happen, or we will never be able to fund the future diseases that are coming, the diabetes, the insulins, and all of those things. And somewhere in there, I don't have a solution yet, but I'm just finding that I think the best we have now is our intellectual capital, and that's free. And we just need to have some objective element to say, what is our each required return on investment and how can we make that happen? In the case of South Africa, Department of Health, what is their definition of return? Department of Science and Innovation, what is that definition of return? As well as Treasury and TTIC. We as manufacturers think that we're giving them a return. Now, again, we think, I'm making think, okay? Because we think, oh, we're innovating, we're doing the science bit. So surely DSI should be seeing what we're doing. Surely we're trying to provide products at an affordable price. Surely we are doing this. But I'm not sure, this is our thinking sitting and talking amongst ourselves. I'm not sure whether we actually are having the conversation. And I'm not sure how that conversation can be had in a very objective manner so that we can come up with a new paradigm. One of the things that we are not short of is being innovative, but provided that there's objectivity. I always make the example of Gavi, and so I'll wrap up just now. That before Gavi, yes, there was a crisis, and then Gavi, and everybody's talking about Gavi, and we know how Gavi has been successful over there. But before there wasn't any Gavi. So surely some people sat around the room and said, the current system is not working. What can we do to find a system that works? I'm not saying Gavi is perfect, but I'm just saying that now we have a system that Gavi and their alliance partners, that 20 years, which means that some people sat around the room and said, let's find a solution. And there came Gavi, and I'm sure there are other examples that are out there. So I'm just saying around this tough balancing act, I'm not sure who can really come so that we come up with a new paradigm, whatever that's called.
It's that question you asked about what is the return that everybody wants. I was chatting to Dennis and Gugu earlier, and we were talking about how we almost need a yellow pages in this space at the moment, because there's so many players, there's so many people involved, and what are they looking for? What does GIZ want in this? What is the return that you're looking for? So there's a need for us to understand every player in the space and what they can do, what they bring, and what they want to achieve. What is their definition of victory? Yeah. Chimwemwe, narrowing it right back, I do believe that there's a massive role in incentivization and preference to be played by regulators. Your thoughts on that? The African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative is starting to, I think, be heard about. I think people are starting to understand that it is the future. How do we use it? How do we get people to see regulation as an enabler of their business rather than as a potential restrictor of their business?
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. Quite a loaded question for the regulatory part. So I want to take us back a little bit as to why we even started looking at regulatory systems strengthening on the continent. Yes, recently we have seen a lot of progress, and as you're rightly saying, out there people are starting to understand what AMRH is all about and how the AMRH is supporting the shaping of the market, how AMRH will support trade on the continent. I recall when we were starting earlier in 2009, these were the conversations that were happening then. We were, as a continent, also trying to find our way in local manufacturing. I mean, the discussions around local manufacturing stem back in the 2005s. Of course, we always ask ourselves some questions: how far have we moved? But I think one of the critical questions that came about was, are our regulators ready to exactly say what Moraina, just what Moraina said, to assure the quality of the products that are going to be produced on the continent and make sure that those products are at par with anywhere in the world? Because we want to penetrate markets, not just within our countries, but beyond our countries, in the regions. And I remember in the plenary, even earlier, the question around, yes, we are talking about the VIM, but as we are talking about the VIM needs to think about the market, the bigger market which is in the region, the bigger market which is in the continent. And I think even discussions about our, the South, even the North later on, how do we make that happen? We can only make that happen if we have quality products that are coming from the continent. That is where now the regulators started talking that we need to do something about it. From that time to date, we have seen quite progress that has been made by the regulators. We did not have, then there were the stringent regulatory authorities. Then the WHO brought in the concept of maturity level, the benchmarking process. Now we have 6. The continent is moving. We have 6 ML3 NRAs. But how do we effectively utilize these 6 to ensure that they work together with the rest of the continent without leaving the others behind? Firstly, to build the capacities of the fellow regulators in the continent to reach a certain level that they will understand what is going on at the continental level. Secondly, to make sure that the products that are produced by our manufacturers are able to be supplied across the continent, to get the market that we're looking for at the continental level and at the regional level. We're standing at a better point now because with the journey that we have taken over the years, and we've seen how our regional economic communities have been able to come together, and bring together the regulators to come up with regional standards, regional guidelines, regional processes for approving medical products at the regional level, for doing assessments, coming up with reports that our NRIs have used. Of course, we are not perfect. We know there are certain countries that have been able to make regulatory decisions in a very efficient manner based on these regional reports. Of course, we know there are others that are still struggling. These are the ones that we still need to hold hands and make sure that they are capacitated to make regulatory decisions based on what is happening in the regs. Building up on that, we are now seeing progress being made at the continental level. We never had a continental process for approval of products. We never had a continental process for listing of products. Now we have it, which is currently under pilot. And we could see the interest that has come from both local manufacturers as well as international manufacturers to go through the continental process. But what will be critical is we need to be able to show that the regulators coming together, working together, adopting harmonized standards and guidelines, they are able to bring in efficiency in decision making. Because efficiency is one factor that will reduce the arrows that go up. If it takes the regulator 3 years to make a regulatory decision on a product, you're losing out on the market. So the regulator has to support that process. Secondly, the quality of the decision that the regulator makes needs to give confidence to everyone at the local level as well as at the regional level. Trust amongst the regulators to be able to work together is critical. I think we have seen that growing across the continent. We are seeing so many bilateral agreements that are between regulators, but also at the continental level and regional level being able to work together. And the last thing that I also wanted to indicate is predictability of the processes that are adopted at both the continental, regional, and the national level. Because right now, I think somebody talked about the various guidance documents, standards that are used amongst the different regulators across the continent. If you're a manufacturer, you navigate, so many requirements across the continent. That is changing. And we are seeing more and more of our regulators adopting standards that have been developed at the continental level and at the regional level to ensure that they also improve their own national level capacities. So I think the regulator has a very important role. One last thing that I'll talk about is the priority products. So now we are creating 3 levels, right? Who does what? What does the national regulator do? What does the regs, that have already started harmonizing do? And what does the continental level do? What we did at the very beginning of the AMA, process that is building on the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative is to develop a continental guidance document on which products are going to be handled at the continental level, which products are supposed to be at the regional level and which ones are at the national level. You will realize that where we don't have capacities, we want to leverage on each other and work with each other, which are the complex products. And one of the categories that has been put there is also locally manufactured products on the continent, prioritizing them and ensuring them that they go through the continental process so that ultimately they are procured by the Africa CDC and the regional economic communities. Let me stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Well, you might think you're stopping, but I'm coming straight back to you because that was just, I get such enjoyment out of listening to Chimwemwe. So the 2 questions, okay, 2 very direct questions. The one that I often get asked is, so our lives are easy in South Africa. to me says, yes, we can buy it. Simple, right? So our national regulatory authority licenses it. We don't mind who else has got what standards, right? But I'm starting to hear manufacturers concerned that to export out of their own country into another regulatory authority, that procurement agent is asking them to be WHO PQ'd. So a manufacturer in Zambia, and I'm only using Zambia as an example, I don't know that this is factual for Zambia. The manufacturer in country A can sell to their local government, even at price preference, because they're registered with that NRA. But manufacturing country B asking them to look at exporting to adjacent markets. Where does ML play in that? Where does regulatory harmonization play in that? Where does WHOPQ play in that?
Well, what we are currently doing at the continental level, I think, remember where we are coming from. There's a legacy issue where the countries that did not have capacity at all,
Yeah.
what they were able to depend on is the WHO pre-qualification process. That is why they could not do otherwise. But as I said, we are actually moving. It's unfortunate, of course, that sometimes in some conversations, when we even talk to WHO, they say, you know, this ML is more on the capacity building kind of, you know, not necessarily the quality of the decision that they will make. Right? So they are now introducing, of course, the world listed authorities to replace what was then the stringent regulator authorities. We've had conversations with our colleagues at Africa CDC around what do we do as a continent? Because we have our regulators that have attained maturity level 3. How do we leverage on that capacity that we have built over time? Secondly, the issues around the continental and regional processes. We have actually worked on ensuring that whatever standards that we adopt at the continental level, they are at par with everyone. That is why actually we are collaborating with our colleagues at WHO to make sure that the standards that we adopt at the continental level are not any lower than anywhere in the world. I think one other thing that we have not had over time, and we are seeing that it is improving, it is the reliance across the continent, and reliance from the national level to the regional and the continental regulatory processes and decisions. So we are seeing more and more improvement in reliance. We are developing a continental reliance framework actually to facilitate reliance amongst the regulators. But I think what is critical is also what I said earlier, that you are seeing more and more regulators across the continent getting into agreements. And we are looking forward. We have had conversations with TUMI and the other ML3 NRAs that can we show the example? Can we see more and more reliance between or amongst the ML3? That would then continue building, and the others would be, you know, will easily rely on this ML3. So I don't think when we are talking about local manufacturing, when we are talking about food procurement on the continent, I think with AMA coming into being, and with more and more of our regulators reaching the capacities of ML3, we need to develop our own continental standards that are at par with anyone else, mechanism for reliance, and ensure that ours become number one. And we're doing more on that, more of advocacy to the member states so that they also develop trust in what we are doing at the continental level.
Is this like one of those restaurants where they turn on the lights when they want you to go home, to me, or have I run out of time, or am I doing an hour, or am I doing are we stopping on the half? Okay. Well then I need to just get into my last questions. Okay, all right. So, Abebe, the challenge was laid down. What return does government want? what return do you want? You're the head of regional manufacturing for Africa CDC. What return do you want?
Yeah, that's. I was thinking about it. I mean, wide. I mean, when the idea of return came to the discussion, so I was just thinking. So, what return the continent is expecting from the continental initiative? I think for us is a health security piece. That's more important. I mean, not more important, equally important than equitable access to health products. So, why we started working on this agenda and considered it as critical agenda for the continent is because what happened during COVID-19 pandemic. Before COVID-19 pandemic, countries were trying their own way in a very scattered manner in terms of supporting local manufacturing, just to make sure that they have access to quality products, not in the context of health security. So for us, is the return is health security. Whenever we're in any kind of outbreak or pandemic situation, we should be able to call in our manufacturers, pivot their manufacturing facility to manufacture quality products to respond to outbreaks. That's a return on investment, I would say.
That agility aspect of security within security is such an important piece, isn't it? You've heard me go on about this, we talk a lot about vaccine manufacturing. They're going to talk next door and fill and finish. We need to have capacity to make sterile injectables as well as vaccines. They're two very different conversations, and the one is a pandemic preparedness and the other is a standard security, isn't it? I've got questions that will run down the clock. Is there anyone who's got a burning question they want to ask anyone on the panel? Yes.
Thank you. This to the Jefferson. So I'm very glad to be here and have you all in front of us. Khadija, I think the secret to lower the prices is economies of scale. I don't think the South African market is big enough. Sorry. Thank you. So economies of scale, and I think this comes only through pool procurement. So what does South Africa need to participate in a pool procurement mechanism, say at SADC level, say at AU level? Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so it's maybe I should say interesting that you're asking that question, because as we speak, there's a SADC pool procurement meeting happening. And, you know, while we support pool procurement, it's very complex in our setting. And we recognize that South African market is not big enough to sustain a competitive, you know, manufacturing environment. So we recognize that. So it just looking back at our experiences with COVID-19 pandemic and the AVAT mechanism, we weren't able to participate on that because it goes broader than just regulatory harmonization. It also speaks to, you know, our financing. And it also goes to the question about, or the statement about, you see, I've got a very bad memory. So I've got to write everything down. Offtake guarantees. All of that is not within the domain of the Department of Health. That sits with the finance people. So it becomes very complex to navigate that. We would be in support of pool procurement because, you know, as I think has been said, in South Africa, it's easy for us. If SAPRA has approved the product, you know, it's fine. So we would support it, but there are some challenges which need a higher level kind of intervention to make it happen. One of them being regulatory harmonization, which we are quite far down the line now. But there are other financial challenges that need to be overcome before we can actually participate actively in a pool procurement mechanism.
And if I can just add something to that, there are products where we've proven the South African market does achieve an economy of scale, but that scale cannot be achieved by any other member of SADC. And so the pooled procurement isn't just about creating what's good for South Africa, it's really about creating the same buying power for the smaller countries with lower buying power. Yeah.
Yeah. can you talk a little bit more about those other financial barriers or challenges that would need to be worked on, and who should work on them?
So, to answer the question, okay. So it's National Treasury because it's in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. So the way our procurement system works is that we buy the product, you send it, or we put in a purchase order for the product, you send it to us. After we've received it, then only we pay. Often these pool procurement mechanisms require upfront payment. In terms of the Public Finance Management Act, that requires concurrence from the Minister of Finance, as he's the only person who can commit to making funds available for future procurement. And that's what happened within COVID when we bought the vaccines. So that's one of the big issues. I think if we can overcome that, then you also, you think of pricing, and it was interesting because we did get a request from Namibia to participate on our contracts. If you look at how would that pool procurement, you said that, it's about economies of scale. But for South Africa, for example, in ARVs, we've hit the sweet spot. We know how it's done. We can teach other people how to do it. But that's because we know our environment. Now, if you do a pool procurement in an area where the infrastructure is not as well developed, for example, in terms of logistics, what does that mean for pool procurement? And it's not just economies of scale, because then there's logistics issues, there's border issues, what do they call that? Importation, and, all of those kind of issues that need to be dealt with. And we in South Africa have transferred that risk to the manufacturer. So I had a question from Africa CDC to say, what are the importation costs and what are the tariffs? And I don't even know what the words are. And I'm like, I don't know, because our manufacturers deal with all of that. But that could be a potential. Like port health issues. Because something comes across the border, how does port health deal with that? Now, we're lucky we have our suppliers who deal with that, so we don't really do that. But other countries have different procurement mechanisms. And it may be that they take responsibility depending on the Incoterms of what would they be paying for, what would they be taking responsibility for. So, yeah, in South Africa, we just put everything on the manufacturers and complain when they don't supply.
And it works, and it's how every other developed country does it too.
Yeah.
Timmy, you got that microphone.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to the panel, really great conversation. Moraina made a point earlier about thinking about the problem differently and saying how we're going to respond to it differently. And I'd really like to get your views as panel members, that with all that we've heard and the challenges that we have, what can we do differently? I always say to the team, regulation is the one thing that is just so tough to change. And if we can have regulators harmonizing, is it possible from a finance perspective, the ministers of finance, etc., to harmonize around how to do pool procurement? I do think if we can crack it in regulation, finance may not be as difficult.
Okay, we're going to use that as the last question, and then for your closing comments. Oh, okay.
No, I just wanted to follow up. In fact, it ties quite nicely with what I wanted to check. And it actually also goes back to what Moraina was saying. Quite interestingly, for me, the cost of the cost of how much you actually pay to produce that goods determines your return. I'm sure you'd agree with me. So now, the problem that I see is that the problem lies on how much do you pay to produce that. And if we do that in different countries, you sit with a problem. I mean, here we had a problem about ESCOM and a number of other costs related to producing these particular goods that we're talking about. So shouldn't we then, as you were saying, shouldn't we then be saying, would it be helpful for your entity, for your organization to produce X number of products and only focus on those products without looking the other way? If it's 10, you choose 10. You do that, you efficiently do that to an extent that you produce, because it's a numbers game. If you produce the bulk of that and you give to half the number of countries in the continent, for instance, 30, and that in itself might as well actually deal with your problem. To an extent that the pricing thereof and how you procure, whether it's pool procurement, whatever the case may be, the price then tends to be aligned such that you then eventually become as profitable, or rather the returns starts to making sense. Otherwise, it continues to be a problem for everybody who produces a number of products all over the world or all over the place at different prices, at different costs, and all that. And then we give other countries the opportunity to produce what they can produce at scale, and then the efficiencies are there. Then the issue about quality doesn't become a concern, because I'm worried, Chair, that we constantly go back to say quality. If SAPRA and the rest of the other bodies have already approved, we should then be assured that the quality is there, and that's it. Thank you.
And that's where the reliance thing comes in. So let's use those as the last questions and for your closing comments. And Julian, I want you to just add a bit of flavor in there as you go past it, which is, we've talked a lot about government. We've talked a lot about national procurement. There's 50% of what gets spent on the continent is private sector. And the biggest area of future spend is going to be around NCDs. And where does that land? So adding that into the mix with those three flavors, a minute and a half down the line so that we finish within 10 minutes of Tumi throwing something at me. Go, Julian.
Great, Iain. Thanks for that simple question. I think it even goes back to what Tumi was saying. You know, it depends on the perspective and the stakeholder, and what their perspective is on that return on investment. So one, I take it, you know, security of supply, equity of access, that's all fine. On the private sector side, I'm sure Moraina will tell you, you know, he wants to ensure that his shareholders gets a return on investment that linked to some financial index like IRR or something. So, you know, we need to take all of this. Government, I know, and potentially, you know, after this Congress, I think there should be a next step where we sort of look at some of these ideas and solutions, and we actually start using them to lobby government. Because from my perspective, so I'm an economist, so I obviously have my own sort of take on this. And when I look at government, you know, government is, you know, when they make decisions, it's usually based on public good, development impact. You know, there's a whole lot of things within their policy environment that they consider. And I think what will be interesting is that we need to sort of stop just talking about price. So while I think there is an argument for protectionism sort of policies, either, you know, subsidies or price controls or whatever, I don't think that is the golden arrow when it comes to most African countries. The reality is that we have very constrained fiscal ceilings, and I don't think that that's the way to go. I think it needs to be a blend of a number of different solutions. And one of them is to sort of make a case to government to look at what the broader economic impact of local manufacturing is, so it's linked to obviously access and equity. And so what we did at Rubicon Health when we started the project, in fact, we've done it twice. We've done 2 socioeconomic impact analysis, and we use normal economic analysis. So we use partial general equilibrium analysis with input-output models to get a very good sense of, at the start of the project and even midway, what we expected the multiplier effect to be on specific economic variables. And just to share very quickly, from our project, just on phase 1, we're able to get a significant multiplier effect on both GDP, on employment, on job creation, as well as on tax collection for government. Now, if you go to government and you know, you're very clear about what your project is gonna, what economic impact it's gonna have. So, you know, if I came to you and you, the president, and I was like, you know, if I invest X amount in this project in this area, it's gonna have a significant shock on that local economy. I'm gonna be able to create, so our project, for example, is able to create about 600 direct jobs immediately. And the economy-wide impact for non-economists is basically an aggregator of your direct impacts, like from the actual capital and operations and suppliers. Your indirect is the impact from your supplies, and your induced impact, obviously, is the impact on the spending from remuneration. If I put all of that in together into just a basic matrix on economy-wide impact, it's significant. There's about 7,000 small jobs that are created in that area, which is quite distressed. And then being able to say very clearly, for every R1,000,000 of output that's generated, like example from Rubicon Health's plant, we are able to generate an additional 3 million in GDP. That, you know, it's quite this thing. So
Who's got that on their KPIs?
So where I'm going with this is that when government is thinking of their return on investment, they need to think if they put together, supporting an enabling environment where you push DFIs to be more responsive, more efficient, and target funding where it's really needed, like early stage drug substance manufacturing. You promote your SEZs because your SEZ is supposed to be spurring industrial development. Push all new pharmaceutical and vaccine manufacturing into an SEZ. I mean, create a whole package, a one-stop package, and that will create the competitiveness. And government will then be able to look at a bigger picture that to say, you know what, we are now the enablers because that's what we're supposed to do, create an enabling environment, economic development. This is what's in the package that will make it, easier for you to get traction. And as government, we know that this is going to be the macroeconomic impact of your project. Create more jobs, we're going to collect more taxes. It's going to have an impact on GDP. I think that's the discussion to take to government. Thanks.
Brilliant. Moraina, are we going to be able to retrospectively declare Indabeni an SEZ? What do you think the closing thoughts are?
Yeah, there's so much to say, Ian, and we don't have time. But just on two aspects, and probably Khadija would be best too, because she sees a lot of what's playing out. But I had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, even to me, was part of a committee that was set up by the minister during COVID that was looking at vaccines. And there, the Department of Health was a secretariat, but we had academics, regulator, manufacturer, National Treasury was there, DSI was there. It was the first time that I was in a forum where, the common enemy was outside. It was either the virus, or it was COVAX, or Pfizer, or J&J.
Or D, all of the above.
But it's as if we could do a post-mortem, but to say, okay, outside of the pandemic, can such a forum that can be had that has some element of some sense of urgency like that, and say, what are the lessons that were there? Now, pandemic, some rules, and we'll never, in a normal state, you'll never go back to a pandemic state. But what is it that we learned? Just for me, just out of that committee, understanding the challenges. I remember COVAX. Complaining about manufacturing Pfizer and J&J, that's one thing. But I remember painfully what Department of Health and National Treasury were saying, the rules that COVAX were wanting of them and the amount of things that, I really appreciated the headache that they had to go through. And so I think we need to, and I'm just using one example to say, something like they don't have to have 500 people around there, but just to say, how can we get those type of stakeholders around the table, to really try and come and let's just use those lessons. How can we do it? How can we replicate this for a normal setting? Something like that, possibly.
Jemima?
Well, I think he has spoken my mind. Exactly what I wanted to say, that I think sometimes the way we act when it's an emergency should teach us lessons. And some of the things we need to make them become norms, because we were able to work in a very unique way, bringing together different stakeholders at the national level. Even at the continental level, we were able to make certain decisions quite quickly, and we were able to work together even more during that time. Can we continue with that? The second thing that I wanted to mention is that I also like the way the continent saw the need to put in place some of these instruments quite quickly. The Food Procurement Mechanism, the PRVM, then we African Medicines Agency came into force like in a record time. The ratifications that we were seeing during COVID really showed that the countries are seeing the urgency of the matter. And I think that's the way we need to start thinking and moving forward. We slow down a bit. It is that slowing down that takes us back. The other thing that I also wanted to comment on is that we are seeing more and more the sister agencies of the African Union being able to work together. We can see how regulatory harmonization is informing food procurement, and how the food procurement at the continental level should go down to linking with the regional food procurement mechanisms. And in the conversations, we are seeing more and more trade coming in African Continental Free Trade Area starting to see themselves that these instruments are meant to support our work. I think where we need to now move from here is for member states to individually start seeing that these instruments are going to be enablers to their own development of the pharmaceutical sector, to the improvement of access and quality of products at the national level. So that's what I wanted to add on. And that's my parting shot.
Beautiful. Khadija?
So there's a lot that's been said today, which I've now made notes all over this little book. But I just wanted to say that I'm actually getting into Moraina's head more and more now. And I agree with him. You know, I think what we need is to take off our epaulets. It's like the Red Devils. You know, there's this Red Devils. They do this plain acrobatics in the UK. And after every time they finish, they come into a room to do like a debrief, but they take off their epaulets, so there's no rank. Nobody's got any skin in this game, and the aim is to get quality, get to the root of the problem. How do we improve? So I think we must have that kind of approach, and I think that's what Moraina's, advocating for. To say when we do paradigm, start with the end in mind. Take off whatever bias you have. Take yourself out of it, and what is it that we want? For the Department of Health, our return on investment, aside from equity and all of that, is security of supply. How do we get security of supply? To make sure that we have a healthy, competitive environment. Because having just one role player in the environment creates a monopoly and puts you at great risk. So, what is that? And then how can DTI help us? Can they decrease import tariffs? Can they decrease taxes? Can they do this? Can they do that? And then DSI, how do they help, with the quality aspects to say, to keep these companies viable and competitive and maintain the quality, this is the kind of investment that we'll make. So each one brings something to the table, and it's not just one department carrying the load for everyone. And I mean, for us, we want, I think the reason why we were so successful with ARVs, because we've got over 10 suppliers. And then that stimulates competition, and each one wants to be first in line. And, then the innovation comes in, because then this one's got this new formulation, blah, blah, blah. So, if we can stimulate that kind of environment for us, then your security of supply has got a tick, your equity has got a tick, your health system robustness has a tick. Yeah. I think that's my thanks.
Well done. Thank you.
Deliberate investment, by the way, it's not just business as usual, but deliberate investment from the very beginning, like making sure that they get the supplies, the raw materials, everything in place in time, and then they produce quality products. And then the governments also must play their roles in terms of, again, I would say, of the guarantee and then procurement. I would like just to make a comment, Khadija, on the financing piece vis-a-vis pool procurement mechanism. It's not like member states asked to pay upfront to buy from the mechanism. There is a financing mechanism put in place where you have a financier who will be buying the products for you, for member states, and member states will pay later. So this is a kind of arrangement so that we will break that cycle of our manufacturers manufacture at a smaller scale and more expensive products, and then member states not buying from our manufacturer. If we can just break that cycle, then at the end of the day, our manufacturers will be as competent as manufacturers in other parts of the world, where you will have products at scale produced and lower price. So we won't worry about everything that we have said today, because the market forces by itself will drive us, because our manufacturers will be competitive. Thank you.
Thank you. But we met to plan for this session. I said to the team, the way I like to do these things is we learn, right? And so for all of us to walk away from this today having a whole pile of notes, having filled your book, having filled my pages. That's the goal. And so, yes, not having 100 people in the audience, Deus, you missed the best session of the conference, man. Not having 100 people in the room doesn't matter as long as we all walk out with a lot more questions, knowledge, ideas. I've got some bumper stickers here, hey? But also to recognize what I said at the beginning. This is a challenge for us. People do not see this as important yet. Yeah. So the political will exists to get us to regional manufacturing. The political will exists to get us to regulatory harmonization. But pool procurement, we got some work to do. Thanks very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been great fun for me. Cheers.
Maria,